Hi, this is Clay Hines, and you're listening to Pucklandia podcast.
Found by Giroux to center. Ludwig shoots. He scores! Johnny Ludwig does it again!
I'm Johnny Ludwig, and you're listening to the Pucklandia podcast.
Jarvis in close shot. There's a goal. Seth Jarvis, the 17-year-old, short side, glove side, high, just under the crossbar.
I'm Cross Hannes, and you're listening to the Pucklandia podcast.
So cutting to the front of the net, and they score. Reese Newkirk along the right wing just took the pass. That was phenomenal patience from Seth Jarvis and the Winterhawks.
This is Nick Chichek, and you're listening to the Pucklandia podcast. Hey, this is Reese Newkirk, and you're listening to the Pucklandia podcast.
Hi, I'm the host of the Portland Winterhawks, and you're listening to Pucklandia podcast.
Welcome into Pucklandia. We have a special edition tonight, previewing the Kamloops Blazers and Portland Winterhawks series in round 2. And as always, Pucklandia is brought to you by Cartside, which is just north of the Glass Palace there. It's a cart pod with a little cantina there that Pucklandia listeners get happy hour beer pricing before the games, which is nice. It's a kind of a sweet little setup there for those that like to get down to the rink a little early and have a beverage before going over to the rink. But anyway, pleased to be joined by Colton Davies with Daily Faceoff, and also pinch hitting tonight would be my WHL Unfiltered co-host Shawn Mullin.
Hey.
So I don't know where do you guys want to start with this? You know, what's your kind of your Colton, your broad brush, overview of the Blazers and how they fared against the Vancouver Giants?
That was a fun series. Obviously quick for them and quick for Portland too on their end, but I thought they looked good. There's a couple of discrepancies. Their power play is not the best at the moment. I mean, they're number 7 with 27%, and then their penalty kill is 13th in league wide with 70%. So there was a couple of little discrepancies there, but not much to complain about considering they had I think it was 24 goals for and 5 goals against in that time.
Yeah, I didn't get to see much of the first 2 games, but it doesn't sound like I missed a whole hell of a lot as far as the, the Giants didn't seem like they had much to say about the outcome of those first 2 games in a sad man.
Yeah, I went to both those games. That first game was just it was a scene. The Blazers just ran that whole game, and it basically that set the tone for the series. I think as soon as they had that 8-0 win, it was just kind of game on. I mean, that second game, Ernst was unbelievable until around the third period when he let in 1 goal. That entire series, he was 1.16 GAA with a .946 save percentage and 2 shutouts. I mean, this guy is unbelievable. And everybody just showed up. And they did that whole first round, too, without Fraser Minton, which is kind of remarkable. He's a big component to that team.
I mean, you mentioned the goalie and giving him some accolades. I mean, we've talked plenty about Olin Zellweger, and the minutes he was playing for the Silvertips, and I don't know what the ice time was in World Juniors, but he was certainly out there every opportunity for Dennis Williamson in that series. I mean, how much, or that tournament rather, how much you think the Blazers D, starting with Zellweger is keeping making it easy for Ernst back there.
I think it makes things very easy for him because there's a lot of reliability there with Zellweger, and he's such a good quarterback for a defenseman that he's like another forward out there essentially. You've got 4 forwards basically out there, and his defense partner, which it kind of rotates sometimes between Logan Barros and Ethan Brandwood, but I mean, Zellweger's +10 in his plus-minus right now. He's one of the top players in the WHL playoffs right now with that, and 29 shots as well. So, I mean, he's incredible. You guys have seen him obviously down in his days in Everett, but he certainly makes it easy for Ernst, I think. And when he's out there, I think Ernst has a lot of confidence in him. He can play the puck, and he knows that Zellweger will be there to get it. And it's truly remarkable to watch him play every night.
So looking back at that series, only the one game was really close, and it was already a 3-0 series. And sometimes you'll see that game 4 where the team that's on their way out puts up a little more fight, and the team that's way ahead doesn't maybe quite have the same pushback in those games because there's not much desperation for them. But did you see anything in those games, a recipe from Vancouver when they had positive swings of momentum, when they had some good moments, where there was an answer for what Kamloops brings? Or was there any sign of that? If you were Portland coming out of that series, is there anything you would take into this matchup and say, well, here's where Vancouver had success that we could replicate?
Vancouver had success on the power play, and they were good with that. So I think, with the Blazers penalty kill kind of being a bit of an issue at the moment, that's really where I think Portland can take over, because Portland has the number 1 power play in the playoffs right now at 36%. And they're definitely a team that's going to take advantage of that. I also think that the Giants, if you go back into the season, the Blazers had a really tough game against Medicine Hat. And that was a game that I think a lot of people kind of scratched their heads at. But Medicine Hat is so physical that the Blazers just weren't prepared for that. And the Giants started to play really physical in that 4th game. And I think that's kind of where it got a little bit uneasy for the Blazers. There was nothing to lose for the Giants, essentially. So for Portland, if they can play physical and they can play that shutdown style of hockey and then capitalize on the power play, I think they've got a pretty good recipe there.
I'm not sure that playing physical is really Portland's forte. That's not. I don't think that's. I mean, I feel like they have. I will say that Game 5 against Everett was more physical than I think I've seen them play all year, and that was kind of. I mean, that was just kind of the tango of the dance. I mean, they were both teams were taking the body at every effort at that point, and that maybe to Shawn's point, a series that had been somewhat lopsided, although Everett had won a game at that point. But, as far as an elimination game, but, I suppose, I mean, they could maybe take a little bit of that, and especially, recency bias being the game they just played, maybe they can take a little bit of that physicality and try to apply it, try to run Kamloops out of the building a little bit.
Yeah, and you're totally right about that, Chad. And, I think, to look even back at the season series between the Blazers and the Winterhawks had the better of them. I think it was 3-1 in the 4-game series. But in the very first game of the season, the Blazers lost 3-0 in their home opener to Portland, and then 2 weeks later lost 5-4 in a shootout. So there is that little edge to Portland when it comes to the offensive realm of things. But at the same time, the Blazers, with their home opener, were without a handful of players as well. So I'm really excited to see how this is going to play out. I will admit that I am bummed out about Chaz Lucius, because he was certainly somebody that was a treat to watch when he made his brief appearance here in Kamloops. Yeah,
that would definitely tip the scales a little bit more in Portland's favor, and they but the three. The 3 of those games, obviously, against the Blazers were pre-deadline, and so that's a different animal. I mean, I've been thinking a lot over the last week or whatever. I mean, we talked about it, in our on our Western preview with Steve Ewan. Subscribe to your local paper, everybody. About how we didn't think that the Blazers did enough at the deadline, and they just kind of took off like a rocket. Well, maybe not like a rocket. They probably don't want that comparison.
I'm going to put my... Whoa, I don't know what happened there. But I'm going to put my name out there saying I didn't think at the time, but nevertheless, I didn't know as much about the conference, but I always felt like what they did to construct their roster was a little underappreciated, because some of the pieces weren't there yet, So it felt like some of the splashes other teams made maybe felt a little bigger initially, but like their big move with Edmonton wasn't reflected until very late in the season. So
yeah, That's totally true. And I mean, Demick has six assists now here in the playoffs, so he's starting to really fit in. But I mean, I do agree. We talked about this too, and like it was a bit underwhelming. It's just in the sense that you would expect a Memorial Cup team to kind of bolster up a little bit more, but I mean, it is really paying off for them. Hofer leads the team in goals. He's on a 4-game streak right now. Yeah, you can't really knock what they did now that everything's starting to play out here in motion.
But sure feels like Zellweger is probably the most important acquisition any team's made.
Yes.
And we'll see whether, how that matches up with Seattle. Seattle probably did more in pure numbers, but is there a single player that's changed the game more than he has? And you're talking a guy who's going to eat, if he has to, 30 minutes a game, score points like a top forward, plus minus like an MVP defenseman, literally everything. I think there's nobody that's made a bigger difference single-handedly than he has.
No, I agree with that. He, 50 points in 35 games, I think. I can get fact-checked on that, but it was from something ludicrous like that. And from the moment he stepped in here, it was mind-blowing. I have talked to a couple people, just fans, who have been around this team since the Scott Niedermayer days, and they said, it's another Niedermayer. They have not seen a defenseman this good or even better since then. It's crazy. He's easily and arguably the best defenseman in all of the CHL right now.
Just because you asked me to, 52 points in 32 games.
Oh, it was close.
And a plus 35. So I mean, whatever's coming on the power play. I mean, he's keeping the puck out of the net at even strength too. I mean, considering he was a -5 in his time in Everett, that's remarkable, difference in and won 100% of his draws too while I'm at it. So, that was in Everett. Never mind.
Here's another one for you: is that he had 210 shots on net in 32 games.
That's crazy.
That's obscene.
He shoots that thing like no other, though. Watching him go up and just try and take on 3 Giants players at once, and then go all the way in behind Vikman and grab the puck, and then go back out to the blue line to get another shot. It's kind of insane that you're watching junior hockey.
But think about it just from an average.
Yeah. That's
6.5 shots a game from one player. That's what some teams get in a period.
Yep.
And he's had 29 shots on net in 4 playoff games so far, too.
Yeah.
Which is a little off his pace, maybe. We're pretty close to him. But
to your point, Shawn, I was listening to a podcast the other day that I think it was Jeff Merrick's show with when he has Greg Wyshynski on, and they were talking about Bobby Orr had something like 400 some shots in a year, and they thought that was a lot.
Jeez.
And that, so the different era, and obviously Bobby Orr is a little different player than Olin Zellweger, but that would project out to about that in a year, and that we were wow, that's a big number, thinking that was crazy, and then Ray Bourque, in Boston days, that kind of thing. That is a really interesting stat you brought up there, Shawn.
Well, and there's only 2 players that had over 300 this season, and it was Zellweger and Bedard. And Bedard had him by 15 shots, but he had 2 extra games. So that gives you an idea how much he directs the puck towards the net. And come playoff time, that's exceptionally valuable because of how many goals are scored in that area.
Yeah, absolutely.
Otherwise, curious. Yes, you can to some degree throw out the 3 wins that Portland had against Kamloops because they were, before November 19th. So everything after that, the Kamloops is a dramatically changed team. But it does kind of remind you at the same time, because as much as they made big additions, they were still very good in the fall. It does remind you how good Portland was then. And part of our conversation on the Western preview before the playoffs was, don't sleep on Portland if they can start to find their game and be a little bit more like they were in the first half. The guy they lost was a player they hadn't had then anyway.
Yep.
So why can't they be an equivalent team to the one that had the success they had in the fall? And if you're Portland, as much as it is a different Kamloops team, and you're trying to remind yourselves who you are, say, hey, you just, won your series in 5 against an Everett team that doesn't go down easy. You beat them 3 times in the fall. From a belief standpoint, there should be an element of that in their room to remind themselves, there's no reason you should come into this series and feel like you're looking up at the Giant.
Yeah. And to quickly add on to that too, they know Zellweger. A lot of these guys have played against him. I'm sure they understand how to shut him down a little bit more. And that definitely takes, I think, an effect there for them.
And we're falling in the same trap as everybody else that talks about the Blazers and that trade and Olin Zellweger is we've completely forgot about the guy that's leading the Blazers in scoring in goal scoring right now in Hofer, who's I always want to call him Joel for some reason, but and so it's and that was. It wasn't a throw-in because there was definitely more assets required to acquire a really special 20-year-old and the right kind of overager for a hosting team. But that was a huge part of that deal.
It really was. 32 points in 30 games for him, 17 goals, leads the team right now in goals. He got his contract, his ELC signed while he was here. He's had a wild ride since he's arrived here in Kamloops, and all the best to him. I actually had a chat with him a couple weeks ago for a Daily Faceoff piece I'm working on about both the Hofers and their Memorial Cup experience. And he, talking to his brother Joel, he's so proud of Ryan, and it's so cool to see the connection that they have. And just Ryan, he even described himself in a sense as a meat and potatoes type of player. But he knows he has those offensive intangibles to get things done and get himself in front of the net. And he said, here in Kamloops, they've really just allowed him to play his style of game and do what he wants to do. And he's really, I think, opening eyes to a lot of people.
And I don't know why it should have taken this.
Yeah.
You look at, he had a very good 19-year-old year. And then in the playoffs, where we often try to say, hey, let's see what the guy does when the games really count. He got 6 games in with Everett last year, and all he did was put up 6-4-10 in those 6 games. And he follows that up in the first round with Kamloops this year with 5 more goals. It's 11 goals in 10 playoff games so far. It says he can handle that pretty good. It's nice to be 6'3" and almost 200 pounds when you're playing a playoff-style battle, right?
Yeah. The line that they have right now of him, Dalen Kiefer, and Jakob Demek, that's a line that's all over 6'2", 6'3", and 200 pounds other than Hofer. But, those 3 guys forecheck and just play so hard. I couldn't imagine playing against those 3.
Well, but that's the thing, about Ryan Hofer and really kind of finding his own, once he escaped Everett. Maybe escape's too harsh of a word, but it's it seems like the ghost of Kevin Constantine still haunts those walls, and
he had good numbers there though.
Yeah, but you look at Nikita Sherbeck, and they brought him over and then didn't let him run free and find his own game, and you look at the various guys that they've. It seems like, they don't let their horses run, and I don't want to paint Dennis Williams with that brush because he is not Constantine, but sometimes it just seems like they, warranted or not, they have that kind of feeling about it, and it's just hard to escape, and I feel like this, the way the Hofer season went for him, I don't know, it plays into that, at least in my head.
I think maybe, perspective or broader view of a player that they hear they're from Everett, they may not think of them as offensively gifted, but his actual counting numbers are no different. He had 36 points in 30 games with Everett, 32 and 30 with Kamloops. It's just that you're, playing on a team that's struggling and not getting that much attention, and is not known for their offense. So you kind of maybe fade to the background a little bit. And so he's able to make more of a name for himself where he's playing now. But, the emergence has been the last 2 years. And when you look at both of these guys, both brothers, nobody really talked about a whole bunch until they emerged when they did. Joel was not highly touted necessarily coming into Swift Current when he did, and then all of a sudden he became what he became, and is now starting games in the NHL.
Yeah, I was going to say, look where he is now.
Ryan never got drafted in the Bantam draft. I remember I think he skated at Bronco Camp one year. Went to Pursuit of Excellence, never had huge numbers until his last year, I think, of U18. His last year of U18, he put up some pretty decent numbers, but nothing that jumps off the page. His numbers his first year junior were just so-so. He just found it at 19 and 20, which is saying a lot about somebody's mental toughness, because if you haven't really gotten anywhere special, been noticed, pushed your way into a feature role by 19, and that's when you do it, that's somebody who has a lot of resilience mentally.
Yeah, and I think a big part about that trade and the others, lesser moves that the Blazers made, and again, we've touched on, at the time people weren't sure, but and certainly they're not the 2013 Saskatoon Blades, but it's a comparison in that they're hosting. Everybody knows they gotta add, and that team was the island of misfit toys, and they never really gelled and found a rhythm, whereas this Blazers team really became more of the sum, greater than the sum of the parts, and that was the thing that we didn't know how that was going to go, and it couldn't have went better really, as far as again the results they had, putting up 9-10 game win streaks down the stretch there. I mean, kind of, Colton, what did you see about that chemistry and how valuable that has been to this Blazers club?
Yeah, the chemistry, it's actually, it goes down all through the lines, I think, too, because you've got Stankoven up there up top with Bankier, with Semenoff, then you've got that line with Kiefler and Hofer and Demick, like I was saying, and then their bottom six kind of just fluctuates, but everybody's just chipping in, and the chemistry that Hofer and Zellweger have provided on the front end, the back end, power play, penalty kill has been outstanding. It's really, Zellweger's really, I think, opened the doors for a lot of players to just, because he gets those, like we were talking about, he gets those shots on net, and a lot of players are just net front now, a little more ready for him, and they're able to bang in the quick rebounds. The chemistry there is very potent, and I think the one thing that the Blazers have really been trying to talk about over the last few weeks here is they're not focused on the Memorial Cup. These guys are focused on one round at a time. And everybody seems to think that they just, their mindset is Memorial Cup, but it's not. They were focused on Vancouver. They dealt with the Giants. Now they turn their eyes towards Portland, and they'll go through it game by game. And if they can keep the chemistry up that they've had throughout the last half of the season since the deadline, there's not a lot that's going to stop them, in my opinion. But Portland is definitely a team that could stop them dead in their tracks. It's kind of weird because we've, playoffs, anything can happen. And we've seen that season series between these two. And I think that could, like you said, Shawn, Portland could have that mentality in their locker room that hey, we know how these guys play and we know how to deal with them.
Well, yeah. And you started talking about it, both of you, comparing them to some other teams that have been in this position. Yeah, they made key additions, but 8 of their top 10 scorers were there all season.
Yes.
Were Blazers already. And 7 of them had over 60 points. And that compares, now, you have to mention with Seattle, and we're not talking about that matchup yet. They have guys like Lambert and Gunther who, haven't played that many games, or Doc, But that compares well to Seattle, who had to add a lot of those guys. It's better than any other team. The amount of scoring they have, the scoring depth they had, that just was there already. And so a little more seamless, I would imagine, from a chemistry standpoint, that the guys they had added to what they already had going rather than having to accommodate them and completely change for them.
Yeah, and that's a very good point.
Sure, but there's actually a lot of parallel, I don't want to call them talking points, but a lot of parallel, concepts here between these clubs. I mean, to your point, Shawn, I mean, the Winterhawks don't have a player on the roster that has played a game for another club in their careers, and the only guy they've acquired via trade was Budazzoni, who's a 16, and had not signed when they brought him in. So they are, even when they added Lucius, he was a draft pick of theirs. They are 100% cultivated by themselves, and that's weird phrasing. You guys know what I mean, and so. Yeah, they and again, the guy they added lasted 6 games, so they have that same chemistry from the start. It's a really interesting matchup in that regard. We talk about how the first 3 times they saw the Blazers, they didn't see this edition of the Blazers, but it was sure as hell this edition of the Winterhawks, and so yeah, they have that in their back pocket too. But you talk about they know how Kamloops plays. Well, I mean, the Blazers have a mole. Some would argue that they hired Don Hay specifically to have dirt on the Portland Winterhawks in case this matchup came up, right?
You could argue that for sure. I'm all for it.
But to be serious about it, I mean, and again, right back to my point of these Winterhawks they were all in the system one way or the other last year and the year before. Under Don Hay, he's seen, at a minimum, he's seen these guys in training camp. He's worked with them. I mean, probably, whatever they do in the summer is keep in touch. But, and so, I mean, they, almost nobody knows this Winterhawks team as well as Don Hay does.
That's true. That's a good point. And this Winterhawks team too is like they're good. Like. I think that's like, I'm not trying to like wash them under the bridge or anything. Like, there's a lot of players on that team that really impressed me this year, like Gabe Klassen, Robbie from Delorme, Luca Cagnani. I mean, Cagnani is like, if he doesn't go in the first round this year, I'm actually going to be kind of shocked because he resembles a lot of what Zellweger was in his draft year. I mean, he's shifty, he shoots a lot of pucks, and man, can that guy just speed down the ice. But like Gabe Klassen, 35 goals, back-to-back 30-goal years for him. James Stefan's been really solid this year. He's got 3 power play goals in the playoffs. He's one of the top power play goal leaders in the league. You got a rookie in Josh Zagreski, if I even pronounce that right, who has 4 points, and he's third among WHL rookies. And then Jan Spooner has been solid in net.
Well, let me bring that up, too, because I think there was a real narrative about Portland in the second half of the season because their record fell off. And I don't want to pick on anyone, and I haven't watched. I mean, Chad, you've watched, but it sure felt like Giannuzzi really fell off in the second half of the season. He lost 9 straight games to close out the regular season? And so he had to turn the net over. And since he has, when you look at the record, and even if you look back to the regular season, when you look at their record with Spooner starting and how he's played in the playoffs, he's been getting better. So it's not that you can wash away the results of that second half. That was a little messy. But goaltending is such an important position that if your starting goalie starts to slip, it can affect every other aspect of your game. And if they're building confidence in Spooner now, who had a great first round, and that's helped them get back overall to playing the confident way they played earlier in the year, that becomes a team that's a whole lot more similar to the fall than they were to the spring.
Yeah, I mean, goaltending in this town is always a conversation. I mean, it's a very difficult place to play in that regard, that the fan base is always on you. It reminds me of like the 90s in Philadelphia when they would bring in these new, Sean Burke one year, and some of these Hextall back a number of times, whatever they did there, and it's like it never seems like it's good enough. I mean, we had a guy a few years ago that set the record for playoff wins, in league history, and he was never good enough, right? And so, when they had that rough stretch, and you, Colton, you touched on this a little bit already, but without realizing it. But they were, there was some goals against and from a distance, but man, they were giving up juicy rebounds in the slot, and the defensemen weren't clearing them out, and there were guys were getting wide open and shooting lanes, and there was a lot of that. I will say it did push Giannuzzi to just in the body language of trying to do too much. I mean, this is a guy down the stretch that had a shutout and lost in the same game, and so literally, and you see him, he likes to play the puck anyway, and then it just seemed like they weren't giving him a lot of help, and it's like, to hell with it, I'll do it myself, and that then takes you out of your ideal situation. Mm-hmm. But they did like the platoon, and that's fine, and they played both guys all year, and the numbers here in the first round have looked really good for Spoonar, and I suspect listeners of the show are more of a fan of the team than any particular player, but it's a little controversial around town too that the people like Giannuzzi. He's a fifth-year player. People know his folks. They've been coming to town for all these years. And so it's a lot of people are a little disappointed that he hasn't got his opportunity. But man, he's been the body language on the bench. With the flybys with guys when the guys score, when they scored in overtime, he was the first guy over to Spoonar to for goalie hugs. I mean, it was but. It's a business, and we're in the wins business, and if that guy's giving you more of a chance to win, according to Mike Johnson, then that's what we're going to do. But I think if something does, if Spoonar does kind of stumble, and this Kamloops Blazers are going to give him the opportunity to do so, then I think they feel pretty comfortable with going to Giannuzzi. But yeah, I mean, it's hard to argue. Aside from whatever happened in Game 4, it's hard to argue the results they've been getting from Spoonar.
Well, 10 of his last 12 starts, he's had a .900 save percentage or better, which is quite strong, and typically even substantially better than that. He's had a couple shutouts. His performance is improving, and you can get a young goalie that gets hot come playoff time. How many times have we seen that really pay off? And it's no shot on Giannuzzi. Sometimes you just hit a rut, and he happened to hit a rut where again 9 straight losses towards the end of the year. So that really adds to the perception of how Portland was playing. But it wasn't that kind of result with Spoonar, and now they've won a series with him. So it's not to say Giannuzzi couldn't step in now and it would be a different story. But that switch, and we've seen it so many times in the playoffs, when a team makes that swap to a different netminder, and often a young guy, and he takes off with it, that turns into a pretty magical run every once in a while.
Well, even 5 games into this playoff run, I mean, I think the smart bettors weren't putting money on Portland to win the Memorial Cup, or necessarily the league, or necessarily get past either Kamloops or Seattle, or they got to play them both most likely if they are to get past Kamloops. So if you take all that, what are you trying to get out of the year? And Giannuzzi's an overage. His career with Portland will be done here sometime in the next month or two. And the Spoonar, if he's the goalie of the future, I mean, you've got him. You've invested a ton in this experience. We talk all the time on this show about playoff experience and how hard it is to get and maintain in this league. And whatever happens in this Kamloops series, good or bad, I mean, it's going to be advantageous for your goalie of the future in Spoonar. And I wonder if that was kind of factored into the decision to the future is now kind of a thing.
Which makes sense, I guess. I mean, like, the last few years, like in Kamloops, like, Dylan Garand really just took over the net, and nobody really saw a lot of what Dylan Ernst could do. And then this year, Ernst gets that starting position, and he just takes off. And he's been so solid all year and so good throughout the playoffs. They pick up Matthew Keeper as their backup, which he's good for what they need, but I was kind of, I thought maybe a 20-year-old or a 19-year-old with a little more experience would have been a better fallback position, because that's exactly what you just nailed on, was Portland has that option now. Like, if Spoonar does all of a sudden flake out, they've got a 20-year-old goaltender who's got a ton of experience in the league that they can now just fall back on. And he's proven before that he is good.
Yeah, they didn't make the change to Spoonar because they had to. They made the change because they wanted to.
Mm-hmm.
And that's it's a luxury they had, really.
Yeah, and I think that's like it's very important for the playoffs to be able to have that tandem that you can really rely upon in case your starting goaltender just doesn't figure it out in one series.
Well, and for my money, a couple of other factors that really played into that stretch that they had where they just couldn't get out of their own way. I mean, you mentioned, Colton, about Josh Zakreski and how well he's been playing and putting up points. And there was a lot of nights when that third line was their best line, which is great. If your third line's playing well, but if your third line is consistently game in, game out your best line, well, you're not going to win games that way. Barry Melrose would tell you your best players have to be your best players. And they
absolutely,
and they weren't getting that. And you look at what happened in this this Everett series. Well, all of a sudden, those guns came alive again, and the guys that you're expecting to score for Portland did just that. And I mean, they have 17 guys with points, including Jan Spoonar. And so at that point, you have it. If you're dressing 16 skaters, they all have points in that 5-game series, and so you're kind of, in a lot of ways, it's the best of both worlds, that you're getting the depth, but you're also, your best guys are showing up and contributing, in a big way.
I have to ask, and speak about the home record, because I think that's a really interesting number. Given the struggles Portland did have late in the season, they still finished 25, 4, 3, and 2 on home ice and a plus 41 with 55 points, which equals Kamloops' home record of 55 points. They were 26, 5, 3, and 0. Their plus was a little better. But it says to me that even during those hard times, and I think Portland has kind of turned the page on that to some degree, they still made their home ice a very difficult place to play. So as much as Kamloops may be picked as the favorite, and they are a good road team as well, it's going to be tough to get those games in Portland. So if you're the Winterhawks, if you can find a way to get one of those first 2 games, you really put the pressure back on Kamloops, knowing how strong Portland is at home. I mean, again, tied for the second best home record in the conference, and actually third best in the league.
Yeah, we've been getting pretty decent crowds, as time goes on. I mean, obviously you could fit, the Sandman Center almost twice over in our building, on a good night. It'll be interesting to see what they do, with the two. Or actually, it's a Wednesday Thursday schedule. I'm not sure I've ever been to a WHL game on a Thursday before. That'll be new for me, but
it's such a weird schedule.
Yeah, well, there's I haven't looked it up, but there's something in the building. Well, I guess it's tonight.
Oh,
or not tonight, but a week from tonight. yeah, there's building availability. It's not as goofy as it was in the Everett series, but and that was in Everett's barn. But yeah, so it's it has been a really stark contrast though over the year. To your point, Shawn, with the difference in the way that they've played on the road versus at home. It's never been that big of a difference. I mean, when Portland was on top, 2013, 2014, that era, that 2013 team set a road wins record that, probably isn't ever going to be broken with 2 less road games now. But, they were always better on the road, it seemed like. But it's been kind of a stark contrast this year. I don't really know what factors into that. They don't seem that interested in line matchups. I mean, we've talked on Pucklandia a number of times about seeing, 16-year-old rookie Budazzoni going up against Bedard, on a fairly regular basis in Regina that night, although they couldn't control the lineup there or the matchups there, but they haven't really ever been that interested in line matchups, it doesn't seem like. So I don't know why that discrepancy is. I mean, just, we talk on these shows a lot about the enthusiasm and how rowdy the American crowds get. Maybe that means something. I don't know, but that's but yeah, and that and as far as at home ice, I mean, there's only an odd game if it gets all the way to 7. Other than that, I mean, it's not like you get extra games necessarily unless it goes the distance.
That's true. That's definitely true. I think you both made very good points too. Like if Portland can close out one of these games here this coming weekend, I think that they will definitely put the Blazers into a chokehold and freak them out. That's for sure.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. I mean, it's the year has been such a roller coaster for this Portland team, whereas it's been a kind of a steady climb for the Blazers. It's just kind of depending on what month of the season. If you said we expect to this is a matchup we expect to see, and I think you would have completely different views on it. If you asked in November, December, January, February, I mean, you're going to get a completely different answer every time, and it's a really unique situation that I just can't really think of a parallel to, a precedent to.
No, me neither. And like one thing too to like look at, and like it probably like scares people when they look at Kamloops' roster, is like the 9 NHL drafted players, which 7 of them are signed already. I think it's just Demick and Kiefler that haven't signed their entry level contracts. And then you look at Portland, and they've got the 3 NHL rights holders with Ryan McCleary with the Pens, but he hasn't signed yet, and then Merrick Alsher, who signed with the Florida Panthers last month, and then obviously Chaz Lucius. The NHL experience and that type of draft experience, I think, plays a bit of an effect in a sense. But there's the saying that you can have too many chefs in the kitchen, and I wonder if we see that with Kamloops or Seattle.
Yeah, there's only one puck on the ice at any given time, exactly. Right? I mean, that's the thing with Seattle, and they kept loading up. I mean, part of me thinks they're just banking on, well, somebody's going to get hurt, so we just have extra guys. I think is kind of the way they. I mean, you got to admire the the poker game up there with Bill LaForge, but whereas it seemed, whereas is a little more reserved with the Blazers as far as trying to push just hard enough, but But yeah, you mentioned McCleary, and he doesn't get his name in the paper that much, either. But I mean, the Swift Current product there. I mean, he's really well rounded. I mean, you think I don't know if it's just with me, but it seems like he gets a reputation for being more of a stay at home guy, but. Man, he's really developed under Mike Johnson as far as he loves the Winterhawks. They have that reputation for forever now. They love the defenseman getting up in the play, and he's not afraid to do that. And I think I feel like there's a pro deal in the works, for him or probably should be. I mean, it's kind of really well. I know I already said well rounded, but I mean that's really for my money the best description of him. And and you also mentioned, Cagnoni in his draft year, and I think that's a very valuable piece. And, what's funny is I don't know if you see very often two draft eligible defensemen that are both similar players and both really good as a pairing, but that helps with Carter Southern as far as the scouts come for Cagnoni and stay for Southern, and yep. I think he's going to be a really valuable piece on an NHL team in a few years too.
I like Carter Southern. I've watched a bit of his game tape. He's a fun player to watch. And Ryan McCleary too. Like, he hasn't even had like a bad career. Like, he had 30 points. I mean, in the COVID year, or whatever you want to call it, the bubble year, he had 7 points in 18 games, which is, a small sample size, but that's not bad. And then 30 points last year, 31 points this year. I like him. I think there's definitely an ELC coming up for him for sure. Pittsburgh, they're depleted in the prospect system. They need people.
I would be remiss if I didn't mention that just a couple weeks ago, I broadcasted a Ryan McCleary game, but not what you'd expect. He was a part of a team here in Swift Current that went the AA U18 team that at the time called the Swift Current AA Broncos, and they went undefeated in their regular season and their playoffs all the way until the provincial final, when they lost their first game of the best of three provincial final and then won the next two. The third game was actually at the Broncos rink, now the Innovation Credit Union place, or Innovation Place, and in front of 2,000 plus fans with the big screen and the music and everything. So I just was contracted to go and put retroactively play-by-play over that game. And so certainly you can see how he's evolved as a player, but he, on that team as a young man, was so key in a leadership role on the ice every second shift, playing in every situation, and such a calm presence. You talk about him being well-rounded, Chad. He did a little bit of everything, and the puck seemed to follow him, and the play seemed to follow him, and he kept his composure in every situation. Just one of those guys that you feel safe and confident with when he's on the ice. Maybe he can do a little more sometimes, and maybe he sits back sometimes a little more, but that you feel comfortable with when he's out there. And it was a huge factor in a team that was unprecedented at that level to win every single game, regular season and playoffs, but one at the end.
Man, I really wondered where you were going with that story, Shawn. I was like, what do you mean you called a junior under 18 game with this kid in it the other day? I'm like, what do you... Were they just pissed at the other guy that did it and wanted to erase him off of there? Or
no, they didn't have play-by-play of it. I think there was a radio broadcast. There may have been, but we didn't have it saved. But I came in and they had video of it because the game was on the big screen that day. Because the Broncos even brought in their tech people to make it a real show, because the Broncos were out of the playoffs that year. It was 18-19. And so I got contracted to come in and put some play-by-play on it after the fact, just to add to the video as the kids and parents take a look at it again, in the years to come, because it was such a memorable team. But McCleary, despite his age at the time, was a huge part of that team and played in every situation. You could see why he was going to be a player that, became an NHL drafted player and was counted on in big minutes at the next level.
Yeah, it's funny. To watch his evolution, game by game here over the last couple of years, and it's like if you created a defenseman in a lab. You're like, okay, take care of your own end. Okay, once you get that done, now we're going to let you rush the puck a little bit. Okay, now we're going to let you rush the puck a little bit more. But it's like, kids want to score. That's, where the glory is. So it's usually you got to, they're trying to fly the zone and you got to dial them back and try to it's the whole offense being creativity and defense being structure. Yep. It's but he started with the vegetables before he got to the sweets. You know what I mean? You're like, no, take more candy. It's okay. It's just kind of it's just been, at least from my seats, that's what it looks like.
And the interesting thing too, a lot of times you get those sons of pros, And you get a feel for them like, oh, they expect too much, or there's a feel like they got handed some opportunities. And with him, his dad was a guy who wasn't supposed to be there, earned his way there, earned every second of ice he had, and then had his career taken away by an injury to some degree. Would have been an example to him of, hey, if you're going to get there, you got to put the work in at all levels. And he was a 5th round Bantam pick, and he's a 7th round NHL pick. So he may have an NHL last name, but he's not a guy that's going to coast on it because his dad couldn't and he can't. And so you've seen him make those progressions and put the work in every year.
Trent was on that 89 Broncos club, right?
93. They just had the celebration of them. Actually, they brought him back for their 30-year reunion.
I knew it was one of them championship teams. I just got it mixed up a little bit.
Yeah, he was really good. He's the president of the board now here in Swift. But he was a 50 point guy that year. He
was a tough player, wasn't he? Well, if I remember correctly.
He played hard. He played in every situation. He killed penalties. He got hurt. His serious injury was when he was blocking a shot and he got hit in the throat because he's one of those guys who went out there and blocked shots.
Right.
So his son would have known from him, not that, hey, oh great, the NHL. That's where that's where you get. That's what's coming. It would be, I had to earn every second. So if you're gonna make it, you're gonna have to do the same.
Yeah, I like that.
Classic lunch pail Saskatchewan kid, right? I mean,
yeah, exactly.
Well, gentlemen, I think we've talked about a lot of different things. Colton, you have any other topics you want to touch on about these two clubs before we wrap up on this?
Just one player on the Blazers I wanted to give some love to because he's been absolutely insane since the trade deadline, essentially. But Emmett Finney. And just like Finney had 6 points last year in 48 games. This year he had 35 points in 64 games. And he's currently on a 14-game point streak going back to the regular season with 7 goals, 14 assists, and 21 points in that frame if you count the playoffs. This is a kid who was a 4th-round WHL Bantam pick who's just all of a sudden, whatever it was, the new year hit. It was kind of around like the World Juniors. And he just found his game. And he has been one of the best bottom 6 players for the Blazers, and consistently, he's always down there scoring and forechecking. I had a text message with a WHL scout who told me that, and I quote, he's really improved in the second half of the season. Like, if you put the tape side by side, you wouldn't even be able to tell it's the same player. He's been very good, and we just talked about depth a little bit there. And, he's a player that's out there, just not a Stankoven, not a Zellweger, not a Hofer, a Minton, a Bankier, any of those guys. But he's really going to get himself noticed, I think. Like, you got to think the scouts are all there to watch all these players. But this kid is really making a name for himself.
I wanted to touch on, quickly if we could, what I think is a really interesting coaching matchup. I mean, you said...
Yes.
You talked about Don Hay, and certainly he adds an element to it because he's coached in both places. He's worked with both coaches, worked with both teams. But for Shawn Mullin, who's had a wonderful run as a Western Hockey League head coach and as a manager now as well, this is a big test.
Yep.
Against a guy who's done it all, right? Now, technically speaking, doesn't get credit for the championship because he wasn't the coach at the time. It was Travis Green, but made the finals, 4 other times or 3 other times? And they haven't got back in a while. But for Shawn Mullin, all the regular season success he's had, the furthest he's made is that 3rd round, right?
Yeah.
He won a championship as an associate coach, but he's made the 3rd round, the semifinal 3 times. Won a bunch of first-round series. So in this matchup, while he should probably have the better horses, you're going up against a guy who's, guided 4 teams that have made the championship. So it, has that experience in these situations. And I think it makes for a really interesting playoff matchup behind the bench and a real testing ground, I think, for, Klusen to prove that as great as he's been, can he take the team that's ready and take them over the top to the next level?
I think, I really like that. It's a good little storyline to think about. And like you talked about, like with Don Hay being there, I mean, the all-time winningest coach, I mean, overseeing it all. He's worked with both of those guys. To think he molded, or he didn't mold Mike Johnston by any means. Mike Johnston created himself, but just to think that he's had a hand in both of those organizations, and now he gets to kind of just sit back and watch it from a little different perspective, being an associate coach this time around. But this is Klusen's time to shine, and you're definitely right. I think this will be where he can really make a mark for himself and take his name as a coach to the next level if he can move past this Portland team and, potentially move past Seattle and move forward.
Well, and it's totally apples and oranges, but I'm going to make a comparison anyway. I mean, you talk about, going up against Mike Johnston, who's, definitely a veteran in this league and obviously had success. And even if, even if those 4 runs to the finals are, almost a decade ago now, but I mean, he asked Richard Matvichuk on the 2017, PG Cougars, who they, won the division. There was the 1-8 matchup, and he couldn't figure out how to solve Johnston that year, and the Cougars are just now recovering from that. And so, this is a Kamloops team in an entirely different boat. I mean, they've won a round. They're playing in May no matter what happens. But I mean, he wouldn't be the first guy to go up against MJ and fail. I mean, they played 19 playoff series in a 5-year span there. I mean, they have it's a very veteran staff too. I mean, Kyle Gustafson been in town here for 20 years, aside from the time he was running the Vancouver Canucks power play, and then you have Brian Pellerin, who's also been in the league 20 years, and this is his second stint here in Portland. So, I mean, they have you could probably add them both up, and they still don't have Don Hayes' experience, but I mean, the newest guy on that bench is 20 years in this league. That's go ahead, Sean.
And for the other side of it, as much as it's a proving ground for Shawn Mullin, who's shown he can be as good a regular season coach as there is in the league. He's only had 1 losing season in all the time that he's run a team. Has proven he can get as far as Final Four. So, matching up against a coach that's been to the dance and trying to take it, beat him, outthink him, out game plan him. That's one thing. The other side of it for Johnston is his reputation, as you said, was really made 10 years ago. And since he's been back from Pittsburgh, they've had good years, but they haven't got past the second round yet. So that's got to be swirling in his mind a little bit. And, the locals a little bit going, okay, he's still really good, but is he still as good as the best? Because, we've been stuck first or second round here since 2016. So it's an important step for Portland, too. Even if they're not necessarily expected to get there, if they're still going to count themselves as among the elite, one of these years you have to go on a run, don't you?
Yeah, I suspect listeners of the show are probably nodding their head wherever, walking their dog or mowing their lawn or whatever, working, I mean, it's been a thing. There's been, a ton of regular season success, and then, you bring in Dennis Cholowski and that doesn't get you anywhere. And, I mean, there's, and that's the thing too, is like, you look at, those earlier teams. I mean, they traded for Seth Jones's rights. They made these splashy moves. They brought in Matt Dumba. I will never forget that slap shot as long as I live. And and then now they're homegrown and have been homegrown and haven't made aside from flirting with Ozzy Weisblatt. I mean, they haven't made those moves, and so it's been a different animal. I mean, it's. Sean, we talk about, the Mark Lamb era in Swift Current sometimes. It's, in some ways, it's closer to that than it was the, the riverboat gambler that we saw, early in MJ's career. So it's kind of interesting to think about, maybe it's it was a Manny Viveros model that if I can, win a bunch of games and move up, and versus, I'm probably not going back to the Penguins, or I'm just going to coach at this level and be content with it. And so now you're thinking maybe more long term. I don't know. But it's been an interesting evolution. And, we talk about the ghosts of Constantine. I think sometimes we think this is still, early WHL Mike Johnson, and he's kind of evolved into a little bit of a different GM anyway. They like to play the same way on the ice with whatever horses they have, but I think sometimes around league circles we haven't really seen picked up on the evolution of MJ as a team builder.
Well, I think people take for granted. They see the Winterhawks, they see Mike Johnson behind the bench, they see that they're in the mix all the time. They're like, oh yeah, Portland's right there. And they are, but still, it's been a long time since they've been in the semifinal or the final. And when you don't get there, then you kind of become an also-ran instead of a powerhouse, right?
Mm-hmm.
At some point, if you want to still be a team that's seen that way, you have to prove that you can get there. You have to beat the best. So, there should be a little bit of an itch or motivation, I would imagine, among that group to say, people are already talking about Seattle and Kamloops. They're already handicapping that series. They're already talking about how they can't wait.
Yeah.
It gets to show that we belong in that mix.
Yeah. I really think, to throw it back a little bit, 10 years, if you remember the 2011-2012 second-round matchup between the Winterhawks and Blazers, it went to 7 games. And in that 6th game, the Blazers won 7-6, if I remember correctly, in overtime. And I was there because I remember how crazy the game was. The Blazers came back and then won. They went to Game 7 down in Portland and lost 2-0 in Game 7. I really think that we are going to have shades of 2011, 2012. These two teams, the more we talk, the more they seem to align and match up. Goaltending really is going to be where I think is going to be the crucial part. And I don't count Portland out one bit. I can see 6-7 games easily for this. And to be honest, I don't even have a winner. I could throw my bias out, but I don't even know.
And if it does go 6-7,
yeah,
and if Seattle is able to, who knows? Because Prince George is playing great hockey down the stretch and into the playoffs.
Yeah,
and their weapons are terrific. But
I thought Prince George was going to force Game 7, honestly. Or, sorry, Tri-City was going to force Game 7. And I thought we were going to have a Game 7 between those two. But Prince George has been good.
That series will be fun. But if Seattle does what's expected and, say, wins that in 4 or 5, and then Portland pushes Kamloops a little further, that could have an impact in the conference final for sure.
Yep.
I had to duck out a second, and you were talking about that 2013 series, and it came to mind. I had to find the player to attribute the quote to, but that was the year Chase Soto said that they're gonna come. I quote, I think we're gonna go into their barn, cause a ruck, and shut their fans up. A bunch of losers down there, just gonna give it our all.
Oh God, I remember Soto. What a guy! I went to high school with him, so
yeah,
that's kind of funny. Yeah, yeah. So that they obviously ate their words on that. But you can't count this Portland team out, and anybody that is, give your head a shake. This is a team that's going to really test the Blazers. Blazers didn't have a test against Vancouver. I said that in Game 1. I texted a friend and said, they're going to sweep this team. There's no way Vancouver can keep up. And they didn't until Game 4.
You're saying that everybody has a plan until they get hit in the mouth?
Basically, yeah. Dead on.
I think that's worth talking about for both the Western Conference series, really. Because I think Seattle and Kamloops, as much as they were having success in the second half of the season, they were both also kind of on cruise control for a while. And then they could be in cruise control in the first round to some degree. And, PG had to scratch and claw through that 6-game set. Portland had an easier time with Everett, but they've been through adversity the last couple months. So, again, that makes the first game, I think, even more important, which is an old cliche, but you're dealing with a couple of teams that are more battle-tested. And, if they can get the jump and be a little more desperate early, those other teams might not. Seattle, Kamloops haven't been in that position lately, so we'll see how they respond.
Yeah, and that's, I don't know if this fits this part of the conversation, but that's a thing I've thought about a lot that I haven't really expressed, online or via this format. But I think that was part of what happened to Portland down the stretch too. That once they got in the funk and lost 3-4 in a row, and Kamloops and Seattle were both really hot at that same time. So you're digging 4-point holes every night. And they were locked into that 3-hole for, a month out, so they kind of didn't have a lot to play for, which certainly didn't help them get out of that funk. And so, once game one starts and you're playing for real against Everett in that case, well, now you definitely have something to play for, and all of a sudden it was like flipping a switch. And, to your point, Shawn, that those other top two teams in the West haven't had meaningful games. There's nobody been chasing them in either division, and so it's kind of it's just a theory I'm working on as far as part of what happened to Portland. Once they couldn't catch Seattle, then we're just kind of here. You know what I mean? It was a weird stretch down to the season there. But I guess we had talked about some time ago. I mean, we've made an hour and we haven't talked about Logan Stankoven. Maybe we should do that real quick. I mean, the best player on that club, and how cool is that to be from Kamloops, play for the Blazers, play in your the Memorial Cup and the World Juniors all in the same year. I mean, hopefully, he goes on to, be prime minister or something. I mean, hopefully his life doesn't peak at this point, but it's getting pretty good,
It is. And, it's funny. I had a conversation with somebody the other day, and we kind of laughed about how he had 97 points this year, and it was almost underwhelming. Like, he didn't hit the 100-point mark, and you kind of almost expected it. But 97 points in 48 games or 49 games. Like, holy smokes. He's just leading the charge here too. Watching him and Zellweger together is hilarious. It's just two offensive gurus just going at it. But what a time for him. And like you touched on, I mean, to be able to be the captain of your hometown team that you grew up watching, there was no other team that you wanted to go and play for other than the Blazers. Then you get the chance near the end of your career to host the Memorial Cup, something that you grew up in this town hearing about constantly because nobody stops talking about that 95 Memorial Cup team here. It must be a dream come true. And he's NHL next year. In my opinion, he's playing top 9 minutes immediately with the Stars. I don't see a lot of players clearing.
That's a big jump.
I know. But I really think that's what he's going to do. I think he can really just take that next step. He might need a little bit of time in Texas in the AHL, but I really have a feeling he can put himself in the position where he's playing, in the top 9 or just in that kind of third line zone next year with Dallas.
I'm always curious, too, with the Memorial Cup teams. You mentioned his production being not quite where it was. I mean, points per game, it's actually probably a tick improved. His goal total, maybe a hair down, but it's not like a huge leap ahead like we often see at this age. But he's already done that. He's already proven that, right? And you already know you're going to be a Memorial Cup host. There's an element with hosts all the time, and maybe a little more evident the first half of the season with Kamloops, where it's a little hard to get that desperation and motivation at other times in the year because you know where you're going to end up. So I'm curious to see what they're going to be like when they get pushed, because they weren't really in the first round, and Portland should push them here. And they know they're going to be there at the end of the dance, right?
Yeah.
So how desperate can they get? Are they able to motivate themselves as much as the teams that must win to have a chance to get there? We haven't seen in that position yet.
No, and you're right. And like it kind of goes back to what I kind of said at the beginning, I guess. I'll repeat myself, but like they're really just focused on round by round. Like I know that like in having conversations with a couple of them, they understand that they're hosting the Memorial Cup, but they're not thinking about it. They want to do this the way that it should be done, where you win the league and you earn the right to go and play for it. Because it's just like, I don't know what it is. And in my mind, maybe it's just like they think they'd be doing a disrespect to the past Blazers teams or the past teams that have gone on and won the league. And then even the year that they hosted it in 95, they won the league. So I think there's just a lot for them to kind of live up to, which is why they're just taking it game by game here. And Portland's going to be the push. And I'm very excited for this series.
I love it. Well, with that, we find your work on Daily Faceoff, right?
Yeah, correct.
So keep an eye out for that, and we'll just I appreciate your time, and we'll be looking forward to see how this series goes.
Absolutely, anytime, guys.
And since this is a slightly different audience, Chad, I will throw a plug out to HNLive.ca for people who are interested in following prospects or other levels of hockey. I work with them in a streaming capacity. We do a lot of sports around North America, especially Western Canada. But if you want to check out some of the future and just a streaming resource for sports, I do some work there at HNLive.ca.
The lineup you guys have over there, I'm just like, talk about the having 20 years experience with you're on the bench or whatever. I mean, it's always amazing me, like you and Pete and whoever else you guys have over there. I'm like, that's crazy that they get you guys to call those games. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's been a blast working with Peter. I mean, Peter Labardi is an encyclopedia of hockey, especially junior hockey. So,
all right. Well, with that, like I said, we appreciate both of you guys' time. I should have left Shawn out there, but and stay tuned.